Hey, I'm Andrew Seco, and I'm here with Tom Gilliland, and we are going to talk about the Court of the Dead, Rise of the Reaper general novel, and I'm really excited about this. First of all, congratulations on the release.
Thank you. It's certainly long in coming, but yeah.
How long has it been coming, actually? What took to get here?
Well, this is definitely one of those kind of odyssey kind of projects.
Yeah.
And, it's got its roots in definitely some older genealogy of like what we've been doing in the Sideshow studio. So, once upon a time, there was a line of original stuff that we were doing called The Dead. That was really a little bit more of a sort of showcase of different sort of undead archetypes. And I think through the process of doing that, coupled with kind of my ancient D&D fueled, imagination, was kind of looking for a way to break out of like the singular little like kind of Twilight Zone-y episodic kind of thing we were doing with Dead and do something a little more consequential. So when the Reaper General became a fixture in the Dead line, it kind of already had some gas behind it in terms of, this was kind of an idea that was like evolving around a sort of court of how death worked for mortals. And, it had a sort of a threefold aspect of this sort of judge, jury, and executioner. And then in the process of that, in establishing that for the Dead, then it was like, hey man, I really want to kind of explore this sort of story, or, again, to use like role-playing game parlance, to kind of create a campaign and do it in a world that was something different and something a little more that like kind of, flipped most of the creative switches for me, which was kind of anti-heroes and, the sort of darker elements of fantasy or whatnot. So kind of delving into the Underworld and Death's plight and how he might be, miscast as the villain when in fact he's actually the hero. Everything started sort of propelling itself forward. And I think in that regard, that's when then the sort of storyline of how did the world of the Underworld that the Alltaker created, how did it unfold, what was its history? And then that was then the story that kind of I was originally working on to sort of tell it from the front end forward. As time has gone on, I've gotten either distracted or by my own creative, ideas or things that other people on the team were doing. Sure. And we pursued other like sort of, blips in the timeline. But this book was always one that I was like, wow. And I think we started this 6+ years ago. Through different incarnations. Originally, it was just going to be a little novella with a couple stories in it.
Oh, a teeny tiny.
Now it's a 2-inch tome of sort of intended epicness. But so it was kind of an origin story. So it was one that I kind of wanted, and I think we used a lot of the other opportunities to tell kind of like, well, here's the circumstances, and here's what the Underworld's and the Alltaker's purpose of. Sort of resetting the cosmic balance from the celestial corruption that's overarching everything in the universe. And so this origin story was sort of slowly originating itself through various incarnations. And as it went along, I felt like it wasn't really catching the sort of the bigger gravity of what was to come later in the history of the Underworld. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I reached out to Beatrice Ranslee, and we started talking about, taking the materials that we had advanced to that point with writers Corinna Bechko and Landry Walker and myself. And we're like, you know what, I want to blow this up to a much bigger story and use it to tell a little bit more of the origin context of the Underworld as well. So that's kind of, the evolution of how it came to finally be in this cover.
You've had this thread since the beginning, since The Dead, before it was Court of the Dead. You've had the thread directly to this novel, and it sounds like it was originally just you, but then you reached out and you're working with collaborators now. What's that like when it's your thought baby?
Right. Well, I think there's an aspect. I mean, I guess there's certain elements of like, you have a sort of preciousness about it because you're like, okay, this is how I want it to go. But I think that again, there's an RPG kind of like mechanism that works in my mind in terms of creativity, that I enjoy the process of collaborating with others to kind of shape up what then can become a bigger story. And I think when I was looking at it and projecting everything out, it was super clear to me that like, wow, this would be super benefited by, multiple perspectives. And I think, when we're talking about, where we're going to redefine what the afterlife experience is, I kind of wanted to draw on different inspirations, and also I love the idea of the way that many of the things we've done at Sideshow have always been when they're really strong, that is often it has to do with the fact that there are multiple contributors in the process. Like different people have applied their expertise, their knowledge, their background, and I think that makes things richer. I think especially in world building ventures, I think that adds a credibility that enhances what's going on. So I mean, you could weave it all out, but when other people kind of point out different things and or bring things to the table, you're like, oh, that really advances this part of the narrative, or it dimensionalizes things wonderfully.
So working with these collaborators and getting all these different threads together, roping it together, can I ask what the most surprising thing that sort of popped out from this project was, the thing that surprised you, the creator, the most?
I think that it was stuff. So once B got involved, and the surprises were in the places that she found to kind of make the interesting little like lore points, or to drive interesting points about Demithyle's evolution and such, and it was always fun when there would be something that maybe I had said something in like a passing sentence, like, I don't know, this probably takes place in a mausoleum like this at a chandelier, or I don't know, you're throwing out like shrapnel and like, well, we're doing this, and then I would come back and read like a draft on a chapter, and it'd be like, holy smokes, you took that little bit of material and wove a tapestry out of it. And I think that would be the fun part, would be that, we knew, we had a course sort of charted, but it would be the ways in which things were then represented. That was where it was kind of constantly, like, I'm reading a story that I think I know, but it keeps making little turns and little detours that are giving me a chance to like go on the ride, and see what the Underworld looks like and meet the characters in a way that is a little different than maybe, what my perceived notion was going into it, but then my appreciation for the way it was being interpreted was like, oh man, this is fantastic. And that was really a big part of the experience. So
it's amazing. I think a lot of Court of the Dead fans are going along for this ride. Maybe not everyone expected a novel like this, a true novelization of it. And I guess I'm curious where this takes place in the story, like in the universe of Court of the Dead, in that timeline.
So let's see, I guess we'll answer for the two sets of folks. We have some that know the chronicle of the Underworld and know a little bit of the history of how the Underworld formed, and then for the folks that are just kind of joining us on this adventure. So we know that the aspect of the All-Taker, he was created sort of at the same time the mortals were, and he was pressed upon by the celestial entities of heaven and hell that he didn't really know anything about, to harvest the souls of the mortals on behalf of the celestials. He assumed, I'm doing what I'm told. I don't know anything else. This is all I've been instructed. So in his pursuit of that, over time and through the different mechanisms he creates and the things he builds in the Underworld to facilitate this harvest, the one thing that amongst the fact that the Underworld starts building up is that his own heart and consciousness starts to recognize the crime that he's now complicit in. Like holy smokes, the heaven and hell are corrupt to the core. They're overwritten with a sort of compulsion to destroy, and he starts to recognize that there's a balance in the universe that's out of balance, and that this destruction is sort of ruling the day, and creation has become cast aside. And so he sort of takes up the mantle of creation, and in that process, he had kind of created different things in the Underworld and start a sort of fledgling court to kind of start to serve as a kind of reflection of who he was. And so that started to give him, a greater sense of consciousness, and he realized, wow, the one thing that I've done wrong was in creating the original Reapers, I created something that was sort of not exactly mindless, but single-minded in its pursuit of a duty, called the souls. Send them across to the Underworld. We'll give them to heaven and hell as we have been instructed to do. But in the All-Taker, coming to this, crisis of consciousness, realizes that this cannot be the case anymore, and also realizes his own Reapers have become corrupted by the single-mindedness of the destruction of this act, and has realized this and has, isolated them in a portion of the Underworld, and realizes he needs to come up with a different way to solve the issue of how to continue to harvest the souls for the Celestials while also staging a rebellion that he has to figure out how he can even orchestrate. And that then brings us to the doorstep of where the Rise of the Reaper General begins, when the All-Taker realizes that the instrument he needs, and that he collaborates with the 3 faction scions of Flesh, Bone, and Spirit, to create a new knighthood that will represent the Reapers and mastermind the reaping, but do it with a conscience. So these knights are created, 100 of them, Demithyle being one of them, and they're all given this sense of consciousness. But the thing that they must do first is they need to be the ones to defeat the former Bale Reaver force that was this sort of excommunicated reapers or whatnot and all. And the issue is that, why doesn't the All-Taker and the Scions with all their power do it? Well, the issue is the Bale Reavers that are in this containment they've been twisted by something called the Dread Script that, court fans by and large now understand is this malady of destruction that is basically eating at the nature of the Underworlders themselves, and it's something they have to kind of resist. And now these Mortis Knights were made to have a resistance to this, so they can fight these old Reapers and not be overtaken by the sort of disruptive, a power that in the Underworld, when you're fighting and working with things, you're essentially drawing on the Etheria, which is tied to souls, which is kind of the gas or the energy or the thing that makes the universe tick. Mm-hmm. But too much of it, like, you eat too much candy, you get a stomachache, too much Dread Script, you become an agent of destruction. Mm-hmm. And so the balance is that they have to restore that, take on this new mantle, and in the process also resist the corrupting nature that has infected those that came before them. And so this sort of serves as the correction. And that this then takes place in the very early portion of the Underworld. After the All-Taker sort of started the court, the factions are just in fledgling form. The idea and the philosophies are there, but they haven't been quite galvanized into institutions. Mm-hmm. And so it's into this world then that Demithyle steps into. And through the course of it, we learn a lot about him, but we also learn about, how did the Underworld get to this point? And there's suggestions all throughout as to, the purpose that we're leading towards. Get this job done, then we've got an even bigger job to do. So the novel sort of explores that the origin of both the Underworld and Demithyle, the sort of kind of heroic figurehead that stands, for the hope of the Underworld mourners in writing, the future war with the Celestials.
I like that Demithyle stands for hope in all of it, and that among a group of 100 that were created, he sort of stands ahead above the rest. Literally, he's huge. But also, there are so many amazing characters in Court of the Dead. Why Demithyle? Like, why is Demithyle the one that we're going to follow in the first novel? Why is he the one for the job? Really?
Yeah, good question. So Demithyle was always, even in constructing the court and everything, and being that it was one of the earliest characters that sort of got a 3D representation, was always kind of a favorite and had a certain aspect of it. So as I was thinking of the Court of the Dead and the role that, we have like Gethsemane, the Queen of the Undead, and the Ruler of the Flesh faction, Zyle and Bone faction, and Elian Astis from the Spirit faction, they were very strong and very set, and I certainly have a special feeling about how all those characters represent the story and everything else. But it was Demithyle was kind of the character that has personal conflicts, has the same kind of doubts or whatnot that we do, but at the same time also has this exponentially higher level of ability. But this notion of kind of the knight in shining armor, but rather than shining armor, dull armor, and and instead of a sort of a knight in name, but more of a force in making. Mm-hmm. And so I felt this was a good character, and also it's one that sort of represents kind of maybe the force or the doing of death, or the All-Taker's purpose. And so, that's one of the elements that we learn in the story is that Demithyle kind of represents the action part of the All-Taker's perception of creating a plan to correct a mistake he's involved in.
I really do like that we get to follow Demithyle, not just because he's been with us since the dead, but because he does represent that hope. He does represent finding your place within an extremely complicated world. And I feel like there are a lot of meaningful themes that are explored through Demithyle specifically within his place. and also just in this novel. But could you tell us what themes
Sure,
really
yeah.
do thread through the novel?
Well, the Court of the Dead has kind of a tagline of rise, conquer, rule. And this was always supposed to sort of, it has a kind of an aggressive terminology, but it really wasn't intended to be a thing about, conquest of others. It was really a thing about sort of rising your own consciousness, learning to conquer your own doubts, fears, or tribulations, and ultimately rule yourself and whatnot. So this sort of element of what's kind of baked in throughout the course of Court of the Dead is this sort of notion that self-determination is yours to determine. It's your responsibility, it's your gift, and in this particular story, it's really, really rigged to demonstrate that through a particular character that kind of is as close to being born as someone could really be in the Underworld, or at least it shows you what that looks like. There's 100 Mortis Knights. They're set up with a wide range of variables and different talents or whatnot. The 4 creators that sort of created this knighthood, they had no "this is the one" kind of idea. It was like, this is the 100. Somewhere amidst this, the cream will rise. And that is part of the sort of learning identity was obviously the book is about Demithyle, so we're not giving away too much by assuming
so he did
he does do some rising. But I think in that regard, that's where the story sort of proves that out, rather than there's no prophecy, there's no there's no destiny or anything else. It's all, here's the problem. Can you put yourself together in a way that finds a way to succeed for all of us? And I think that was where I think the self-determination theme became as much about the individual as about how it's important to be the best individual you can, so that you can be amongst other individuals and then everyone can shine.
I love that. I'm really excited to dive into this book. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you all for watching. If you want to learn more about Court of the Dead, Rise of the Reaper General, follow that link below. Thanks so much.